started off pretty exciting. The long-awaited torque converter was finished. I went and picked it up and brought it home, pre-filled it with transmission fluid, and then mounted it up to the transmission. After it was up there, I had to make sure all my hard measurements that I was working on for the last, it feels like a year, but it was about 2 months, worked out. So we had the right amount of projection of the torque converter so that when we mounted everything up together, it all lined up properly and everything works out. So got it all slid into position, clicked in, and then we'll move on to assembling it up to the engine.
So the distance that I've been caring about so much has been this right here, which is between the torque converter and the kind of the front edge of the flex plate. So the tolerance I was given was no less than 1/8, no more than 1/4, and I ended up right in about 3/16. So I'm happy, came where I wanted it to, so I can make all this happen now.
So here's a quick status, what it looks like under the hood. So engine back in, transmission, everything looks good. Remote oil filter mount here. I had to do that because if you look down here, the stock filter would have went right into this control arm. So I put the remote oil filter, and then I can pull some lines, mount it up here. Easy to do oil changes, and shouldn't cause me any problems. Belt system back on, ready to go. For the power steering pump, which is this little guy right here, I needed to leave him on because of the belt routing, but I'm actually didn't want to run power steering on the car. It has a manual rack, and I couldn't find any really good options to switch it over. So what I ended up doing is inside the power steering pump itself, I removed the pressure valve, the pressure regulating valve, which will mean it'll just recirculate. So I'll still top it up with fluid. I put a plug in the bottom of where the pressure line comes out, and I put a plug in the return line. So theoretically, anybody can correct me if this won't work, but I think it's just going to recirculate fluid back into the reservoir through like the bypass where the pressure relief valve usually would let it go, and should just kind of circulate and shouldn't overheat or do anything else. But with the routing of the belts, I needed to leave them on. Battery mount is back in. I had to adjust it a little bit to work around my new shock mounts, but overall, things look good up here. You probably noticed there was something big missing off the front of the engine when I was there. It's my intake. I was having my little man help me drop the engine in. I got a bit of a video that'll show that a little bit. But when we were doing that, he bumped a table that had this sitting on it. And this is missing something pretty important off of it right now, which is this part. You can see the plastic just broke right off. It typically fits right here, and it's kind of your remote oil fill, but I don't think I could ever repair this. When you look at the plastic, it is pretty dry, rotted, and kind of not looking in the greatest of shape. I think with the heat that these engines go through and having this plastic nylon style manifold up top, it just wasn't great for it. So I've ordered a new manifold, but yeah, it's a little bit disappointing because I had steps 1 through 50 of everything I needed to do to get the car started this time. And unfortunately, that kind of derailed me because now I got to wait about a week to get a new intake manifold. Under the dash is a mess of wires, as you'd probably expect, but I was working at tidying it all up, and I did finish all the ignition wiring. So if I turn the ignition on, everything fires up. Trans controller is ready to go, heading under the dash there. And if I come over here, I don't have There's just a little bit of oil in the car, not a lot right now, so I don't want to do too much, but if I press the starter button, it engages and everything works, which is fantastic. The new digital dash looks pretty slick, I have to say. Right now it's got no data because I don't have the ECU hooked up at the moment. But once that's hooked up, it will spit out oil pressure and everything else that you would ever want to monitor on this car. So here's what the transmission looks like dropped in. That's the leveled dipsticks coming up there with the braided line. Then they got the two black braided lines coming back here. Those are running to the transmission fluid cooler. So it's back up underneath the floor, and let's go underneath and we'll take a quick look. So here's the trans oil cooler, kind of underneath the floorboard. Hard to video here, but there it is, underneath the floor, mounted up underneath. Two lines run and fill that guy. So then there's the fuel system, so that line runs from the tank. Then it goes through the coarse filter, which pulls out kind of any bigger junk, debris, anything that's in it. Then into the pump. And then up here is the fine filter. So for EFI or like fuel injected applications, you don't want even small stuff getting in there. So that's what this one's for. So the whole point of this arrangement is you put the coarse filter first because it doesn't take a lot of force to draw through. Then the pump. The pump doesn't like to be cavitated, which means it's trying to draw fluid, but it can't get enough, and it kind of makes a vacuum and messes up with air and makes a really sad sound and breaks the pump. So that's why you don't put the fine filter before the pump. But anyway, so there's the fine filter there, and then it runs from there, braided line all the way up to the car. And then this other line coming over here, that's the return line going all the way back to the tank. So I have a regulator up on the wheel well, which I'll go and show you. And yeah, that's the return line. Then the brake system underneath here, I guess we could look at that too. We've got the master cylinder, power master cylinder, or vacuum assist, I guess. It's one line to the front, one to the back. And then I put, because it's disc brakes in the master cylinder under the floor, you have to run a residual pressure valve. So I actually have a proportioning valve there in line, and then the residual pressure valve up here. The whole point of that is that you don't want all the fluid essentially draining back, because since your master cylinder is mounted under the floor, it's now your lowest point. So if it drains back, you end up with bad things happening, right? So that's part of the intention of this residual pressure valve. So we've got one on the front and on the back to kind of hold some pressure in there for us. The other demoralizing thing about the intake manifold is that all of the kind of wiring harnesses route over there. So when you think about it, you had your 8 injectors, your 8 coils, the map, your idle air controller, everything that typically controls that top end of the engine can't be wired on right now, so it's all just hanging over the side here, waiting in a hushed anticipation for us to get the intake manifold back. But I have to say, I kind of like the color. The bright orange in the engine bay with a little bit of black, it definitely sets it off from the rest of the engine bay, and yeah, I think it looks pretty good.